Tonight you will check on your sleeping child 3 times before you go to bed yourself. You will press your hand gently on their chest just to feel it rise. You will lie awake for a moment longer than you need to, listening. It feels instinctive, it feels ancient, but the real answer is far stranger than instinct alone. For most of human history, keeping a child alive was not something one person did. It was not even something 2 people did. It was a job for an entire group, spread across dozens of hands, eyes and bodies, working almost without pause. And the reason why reveals something uncomfortable about the way you are raising children today. Start with the numbers. For the vast majority of human existence, roughly half of all children died before reaching adulthood. Half, not from war most of the time. From something far more mundane. Infection, a fall, a fever that spiked in the night with no way to bring it down. Anthropologists Kim Hill and Magdalena Hurtado spent years living among the Ak people of Paraguay, one of the last populations to still practice a hunting and gathering lifestyle into the 20th century. Their research found infant mortality rates almost unthinkable in a modern hospital. And yet, humanity did not disappear. It spread across every continent on Earth. The answer was not toughness, it was not luck, it was structure. A structure built into the architecture of how ancient humans lived, one that modern life has quietly dismantled without anyone really noticing. Here is the strange part. Human babies are, biologically speaking, a disaster. Think about it. A baby elephant can stand within 20 minutes of birth. A baby giraffe can run from predators within hours. A human baby cannot even hold up its own head for months. It cannot feed itself. It cannot move away from danger. Why would evolution produce something so catastrophically helpless? The answer starts with your skull and your mother's hips. As human ancestors began walking upright, the pelvis narrowed to make bipedal movement efficient. At the same time, the human brain kept growing larger, generation after generation. These 2 evolutionary pressures collided head-on. A baby with a brain large enough to be born at a later developmental stage simply could not fit through a narrowing birth canal. So evolution found a workaround. Human babies are born early, dramatically early. Some researchers describe the first year of a human infant's life as an extension of pregnancy that simply happens outside the womb. This means every human baby, from the first Homo sapiens to the one born in a hospital last week, requires an extraordinary amount of care. Care that one exhausted mother working to gather food, avoid danger, and stay alive herself could not provide alone. So who provided it? This is where the story takes its strangest turn. For decades, scientists assumed human child-rearing worked the way it does in most modern Western households. 2 parents, 1 household, occasional help from grandparents, a nuclear unit, self-contained and self-sufficient. But when anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy examined the actual behavior of hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, she found something completely different. Hrdy discovered that human children were raised not by a pair, but by a network. She called it cooperative breeding, and it is one of the most quietly radical ideas in evolutionary anthropology. In these societies, infants were regularly held, fed, soothed, and watched over by individuals who were not their biological parents at all. Aunts, older siblings, grandmothers, unrelated members of the group. Sometimes a baby would be passed between a dozen different sets of arms in a single day. Researchers who studied groups like the Efe people of Central Africa documented infants being held by someone other than their mother for well over half of their waking hours. Half. Not occasionally handed off for a moment of rest. Genuinely, structurally shared. Why does this matter so much? Because it changes the entire equation of survival. A mother alone has 2 eyes. A group has 20. A mother alone can carry 1 child through danger. A group can carry, feed, and protect several children simultaneously, even while some adults are away hunting or gathering food for hours at a time. A child was never truly unsupervised because the responsibility for that child never truly belonged to one person. There is a phrase anthropologists sometimes use to describe this arrangement. It takes a village. You have heard this phrase before, probably as a saying on a greeting card, but it is not a metaphor here. It is closer to a literal biological description of how your species evolved to raise its young. A human child was never designed to survive being raised by one exhausted adult in isolation. Now think about grandmothers for a moment. In most mammal species, females stop reproducing shortly before they die. Humans are strange here too. Human females can live for decades after menopause. Why would evolution keep an individual alive so long after she can no longer reproduce herself? Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes proposed an answer that reshaped this entire field. She studied the Hadza people of Tanzania and noticed something remarkable. Grandmothers were not sitting idle. They were out gathering food, often more efficiently than younger women, and funneling that food directly to their grandchildren. Hawkes argued that this labor allowed mothers to have their next child sooner, without starving the child they already had. A grandmother in this view is not a retired member of the group. She is an active survival mechanism refined by evolution over countless generations. This became known as the grandmother hypothesis, and it suggests that the presence of an older non-reproducing woman in a family unit measurably increased the survival odds of her grandchildren. Pause on that for a second. The reason humans live so long after their reproductive years, longer than almost any other species on the planet, may be because keeping children alive required more hands than two parents alone could ever provide. Now here is the counterintuitive twist. You might assume that constant handling, constant passing between different caregivers would be stressful for an infant. Modern parenting advice sometimes worries about too many hands, too little routine. But ancient childhood did not work that way. Researchers observing groups like the Kungsan of the Kalahari found infants who were remarkably calm, who cried less overall than infants in isolated Western households, because a cry was almost always answered within seconds by someone nearby. There was no waiting. Help was already there because help was everywhere. Feeding worked the same way. Breastfeeding on demand, sometimes by more than one lactating woman in the group, kept infants close to a source of comfort and nutrition almost constantly. Weaning happened gradually, often not until a child was 3 or 4 years old, far later than most modern parents imagine. A child was rarely left to self-soothe in the way that phrase is used today, because self-soothing was never really the plan. The plan was other-soothing, constant, communal, distributed across many bodies. Even sleep worked differently. In most hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists, infants slept in close physical contact with an adult, sometimes several different adults across the course of a night. Co-sleeping was not a parenting choice debated on internet forums. It was simply how every human had ever slept for nearly the entirety of the species' existence. The isolated crib, in its own separate room, monitored electronically from another floor of the house, is an almost laughably recent invention when measured against the full timeline of human parenting. Consider what this meant for the mother herself, not just the child. In a cooperative system, a mother could set her infant down. She could rest, she could gather food, mend tools, or simply sleep, knowing someone else's eyes were on her baby. This was not a luxury, it was a biological necessity. A hunting and gathering lifestyle demanded an enormous amount of physical labor, and a mother who could never put her child down, who bore the entire burden of vigilance alone, would eventually collapse under the weight of it. The network did not just protect the child, it protected the mother's ability to keep protecting the child. Remove that network, and the entire system becomes fragile in a way it was never designed to be. There is another piece of this puzzle worth naming. Older children were not treated the way modern childhood often treats them, as separate from the world of work and responsibility. By the age of 6 or 7, children in many hunter-gatherer societies were already contributing directly to the survival of younger siblings. They fetched water, they kept watch, they carried infants on their hips while adults worked nearby. This was not exploitation, it was integration. A child learned to care for others by being handed real responsibility early, inside a web of adults who were still always watching. The line between being cared for and beginning to care for others was blurry and crossed gradually, surrounded by support the entire way. So if this cooperative system worked so well, why does it feel so foreign to you now? Why does modern parenting so often feel like a solitary, exhausting marathon, run by 1 or 2 adults with no village in sight? The shift happened gradually, then all at once. As agriculture spread, families began settling into fixed plots of land rather than moving together as large, flexible bands. Wealth and property became tied to smaller family units. Industrialization pulled people away from extended family networks and into cities where a single household might live nowhere near siblings, cousins, or grandparents. The nuclear family, 2 parents raising children largely alone, is not the ancient default. It is closer to a historical anomaly, a structure that emerged out of economic convenience, not evolutionary design. And your body did not get the memo. This is the modern mirror. And it is worth sitting with for a moment. Your nervous system still expects a village. When you feel overwhelmed as a parent, when you feel like you are failing simply because you cannot be everywhere and do everything for your child at once, you are not weak. You are not doing something wrong. You are a single node in a support network that for nearly the entire history of your species was never meant to be single. Researchers studying cooperative breeding increasingly point to the isolation of modern parenting itself as a significant contributing factor to parental burnout and exhaustion. You were handed a job that used to require 20 people and told to do it with 2, sometimes with 1. Think again about that baby monitor on your nightstand. It is, in its own quiet way, a technological substitute for something your ancestors never needed a device to provide. Presence. Immediate, physical, human presence. Your ancestors did not need a speaker to alert them that a child was crying, because someone was almost always already close enough to hear it directly. The monitor is not a modern convenience. It is a patch, stitched over a gap left by the disappearance of the village. Look at how modern parents have tried, often without realizing it, to rebuild pieces of that missing village. Online parenting groups, where exhausted mothers trade advice at 2 in the morning, function as a thin digital echo of the aunts and grandmothers who used to be in the next room. Daycare centers, in their own institutional way, attempt to recreate the distributed watching that once happened naturally within a kin group. Even the modern obsession with parenting books and expert advice can be seen as a search for guidance that used to simply live inside the collective memory of an extended family, passed down through direct demonstration rather than printed pages. None of these substitutes are wrong to use, but it is worth noticing how much effort now goes into manually reconstructing something that ancient family structures once provided automatically. As a simple byproduct of how people lived together. This does not mean ancient childhood was somehow better. It was still brutal in ways modern medicine has thankfully erased. Half of all children still did not survive to adulthood, no matter how many arms held them. Disease and injury took children that even the most attentive network could not always save. Nobody is arguing for a return to that world, but the structure surrounding the children who did survive, the sheer density of care distributed among so many people, offers something worth noticing. It suggests that the loneliness so many modern parents feel is not a personal shortcoming. It is an evolutionary mismatch, the friction between an ancient design and a radically different modern environment. So tonight, when you check on your sleeping child for the third time, when you feel that quiet pull to make sure they are still breathing, understand what you are really feeling. You are not simply an anxious modern parent. You are the last remaining node of a system that used to include grandmothers, aunts, siblings, and neighbors, all sharing the same weight you now carry mostly alone. Your instinct to watch, to listen, to reach for your child in the dark is not new. It is ancient. What has changed is not the instinct. It is everyone else who used to be standing beside you sharing it.